Next, we're going to move on to traditional foods youth projects. And we've got three presenters, Marie Reyna, Tony Dorame, and Christopher Chavez. We'll go with, let's go with Marie. We had the late Michael Lakapa on the Indian Advisory Panel here, and getting to Porter's definition of tradition. He's a storyteller and an author and an artist. And he was asked at the first meeting, we need a handheld, I believe. At the first meeting he came to, he was asked to tell a story before we did the closing prayer to our meeting. At the second meeting he was asked to tell a story, and hey, a tradition was born. But he had the story that started out, when I wake up in the morning and if I hear, it was going to be a good day. And that's always stuck to me because he repeated it throughout the story. And it just brought back memories to me, and I'm sure a lot of you who grew up with mothers, or in my case, a grandmother, who in the morning I would allow me to hear, and it was a good day. We have Marie Reyno from Taos Pueblo, and she's going to speak about the Summer Youth Farming Project. Marie?
Thank you. Tamko Pioho. I am the director of the Uuna Art Center at Taos Pueblo, soon to become Uuna Cultural Center, home of the Taos Indian Children's Art Center. The Heritage Project, Tiwa, Language, Culture, Art, and History, came about because several years ago, the Bureau of Indian Affairs mandated that all their schools bring language and culture back after the Bureau spent 100 years destroying that among Indian communities. My father used to tell us stories that somebody tattletaled on him at school because he was speaking Indian. So the principal got this log, and he made my dad carry it on his shoulders for quite some time. Well, it's very hard to teach culture and language in a classroom. And at Taos, as maybe in some other villages, that's not how language and culture is learned. It's learned through everyday practical applications in your homes or through our grandparents or other relatives. So I could see the frustration of the Native staff members because, one, that's not how our language is taught, and they were talking about writing. And for Taos, we don't have a written language, it's all oral. So I talked to my dad because my grandparents' home, my father's parents' home, is just right on the east side of the village. We have a wall that goes around our village, and we're right beyond that wall. And my grandparents were farmers. My uncles were farmers, and some were cattlemen. My grandfather had some milk cows, and so he sold milk to the schools. And so I come from a long line of farmers, as most every Pueblo person has that experience, because farming is a Pueblo tradition from the beginning of time. So I asked my father if we could use our village home as the site for the Heritage Project. My grandfather had an orchard at one time, and it was all pulled out. So it's really quite a nice place. I have a little display outside of our summer camp this year. Unfortunately, the pictures of our garden didn't come out. But we grow traditional blue corn, white corn, and sweet corn, Taos Pueblo red beans, squashes, and pumpkins. We generally start out in the spring session, but this year it was very cold. So we had to wait about till mid-May. But generally our kids are the ones that are involved in the planting of that garden. And we talk to them about these traditional foods that not only Taos but other villages produce. And in my history class, we talk about the tradition of Pueblo farming. So right now, because Taos is a good 50 miles away from most of the Rio Grande Pueblos, we have an issue with the climate. We try to start to plant as soon as we can in May, but this year we couldn't because it was very cold. But we finally got in, and then we started our summer program. And we have about 15 to 20 kids, depending on what their summer schedules are like. So they plant, they cultivate, and this year there were a ton of grasshoppers. And they hit the upper northern parts of people's gardens and destroyed them. Well, then we started noticing there were grasshoppers in our garden too. And because people were telling me, oh, they ate everything. So we were thinking, well, what can we do, to preserve our garden? And my partner, Carl Concha, who helps in the gardening, he comes from a long line of farmers too. And they decided they were going to capture them. So they got a jar, and all the kids went out into the garden, and they started gathering all the grasshoppers, and they collected quite a few. And then he reminded them that those grasshoppers were good for fishing. So we had to divide up the grasshoppers so the little boys would have their bait. And so they go with Carl from the irrigation ditch that comes into our garden, and the head gate is about maybe not quite a mile, but they start at the garden and they begin to clean their ditch, and they take it all the way up to the head gate, and they clean that, and if we're able to, we can finish that in a day, and then the next day they'll bring the water. Water is a big issue because our irrigation water comes off our river, but it's all from the snowpack. And this year, we barely made the minimum snowpack. So by July, the rains didn't come, and the water level dropped. And our at the head gate, it's up here, and they always have to build up so that the river water can hit the head gate and then come down. And there's several people who work on that ditch, but we're the only ones that ever clean it. And then the kids go up and they go to the head gate, and they're taught how this is done, how you open the head gate and release the water, and then they chase the water all the way back to the garden. Now, some of our kids, because it's what it is, 2016, don't really know the history of farming at our village and how from up towards the canyon, the fields go in steps like this. And now they make us sign up for water so we could have the water for whatever period of time they assign it. And kids and water, there's nothing like it. And even though the irrigation ditch is only about a foot wide and maybe the water coming through is maybe like 4 or 5 inches, they go crazy. So they're in there playing in the water, and then Carl shows them how to set the different areas of the garden so that the garden gets a good chunk of water. And they really enjoy that. I was hoping to have pictures of the kids when they were hoeing and planting, and but I don't have them, unfortunately. But when you look at that little display outside, in the background you can kind of see the squash plants, the bean plants. Unfortunately, the weather changed, and it got cold a lot sooner than it normally does. We usually harvest in October. So spring, summer, and fall, we have 3 sessions, usually about 6 to 8 weeks. But the Heritage Project, the central portion of that is language, and everything else goes around that. And this year we began an immersion program. We have a number of young boys who are going into our kibas, and they need to learn the traditional foods, so it won't be so foreign to them when they go in, because that's what they have to eat during their time, anywhere from 18 months, and some go another route that's only 6 months. And if you don't recognize those foods and aren't familiar, we've had little boys that just refuse to eat. You know, they want their hamburger, they want their chicken, all that, and they can't have it. So now parents are bringing these young boys, like we had a group this summer, there were 4 of them that are going in this coming winter. And all we served for lunch was traditional foods, except when the other camp came, which is called Art for the Fun of It. Then we would fix a regular pansai or white people's meal, because we didn't want to waste that food if they didn't want to eat it. But now next year it's gonna be a combined camp, so everybody gets their language, traditional baking, traditional foods like cornmeal with blueberries, or we make what we call uhuhus, and it's like a little tamale, and we put the piñons, or we put honey, and each group is divided for each one of these sections. The kids that go to cooking, they're responsible with their traditional cook to make the lunch for the camp. Then we have the kids who are in the garden, and another group that sits with me, and I talk about Pueblo history from ancestral times to now, and the tradition of Pueblo farming. Many of our villages are still planting the same food sources that our ancestors provided in the past, and the many different ways you can make this food. My staff and I would donate deer meat, elk meat, and then our war chief provided us with buffalo meat. We have a large herd of buffalo that was donated by a gentleman from Texas. His last name was Goodnight, and he donated a small herd of buffalo, and now our herd numbers in about 150, and those buffaloes are culled, and the meat is distributed to the families whose children are in our traditional religious activities. And so our children had a wide range of traditional foods. And then we also take them out in the spring to gather the wild greens, spinach, parsley, wild celery, and such. And now these kids love it. We have a frying pan that's like about 18 inches across and maybe 3 inches deep. And they bring the greens back, we show them how to clean them, and then we separate some for lunch, and then they're shown how they can be dried. Now that we have freezers, we also tell them how this food can be frozen. In the fall, near the beginning of the fall, we pick choke cherries and wild plums, and we dry them in the old manner by placing them on the rooftop. And so they would come during the day and say, "Is it time to flip them over?" And I would say, "Yeah, just give me a minute." So we'd go up, because we have 2 stories at our house, and we climb the stairwell, and the kids get the edges of the canvas and they flip them over, or they'll call me and say, "Metu, it's going to rain. Who's going to cover our plums and choke cherries?" "Don't worry about it. I'll send Carl," you know. I was hit with an autoimmune disease about 8 years ago, and it messed with my kidneys. They're not dead, but they're not up to par. So I'm on dialysis 3 days a week, and that's quite taxing sometimes. And it makes it hard for me to be at Heritage. I don't usually come till around 11, where my staff is there at 9 and kids come at 10. But what this is all based on is, as a child, I was able to go to my grandparents. That was the most favorite place in the whole wide world, because Grandma's house is where all my cousins would meet too, because the parents would send them over, the boys, to chop wood, or at that time haul water from the river. Whatever Grandma needed, they took care of. I didn't get to go there all the time because I live about a mile from the village, but when I could, I would go. My dad would say, "Who wants to go to Grandma?" Me. So I got that relationship, not as strong as I would like it, but while I was there, I saw everything that was related to the growing of these traditional crops. When the beans were done, my aunties and other relatives would come, because it'd be a lot of beans that we needed to shell. And I would sit there with them and listen to their conversations the best I could understand. And like we were talking about the sound of tortillas. Well, my mother remembers, she's from Okeawinge, that was San Juan Pueblo, and the smell of, when the chilies were being gathered, the smell of green chili roasting, and the smell of tortillas. And man, that's all you needed was a piece of tortilla and your chili and a little salt, and you were good to go. But I learned a lot from my grandparents. I learned that when they talk about the community, they're not talking about somebody over there. My grandpa said, "You are the community, and you must participate to the best of your ability to be a contributing member of our community." So this year is our 11th year of Heritage, and we have gotten very many compliments from the parents. And this year, we always hold the end of summer family celebration. And because they're eating more traditional foods, we do hot, the usual hot dogs, hamburgers. But this year we decided, nope, we're going to show everybody the foods that we make and the foods that we serve to our kids. So this year we had an evening meal, invited parents, and we invited tribal officials, but unfortunately they didn't show. But we had red beans, we had elk, we had buffalo, we had traditional breads made from blue corn or white corn. For dessert, we had rehydrated plums and choke cherries. And I must say that when the ladies come together, man, do they have some amazing recipes in their heads. And we've always had flack from tribal government because of the foods that we're making. So we offered to serve the tribal council meeting their lunch. And we made everything we knew how to make. And one of the council members got up and said, "Who made this food for you?" I said, "Nobody made it for us. We know how to make this food." And they were saying, "Well, this is daipal, Indian food that is made for traditional things." But I reminded them, before the white man came, white flour, sugar, this is what we ate on a regular basis. So because the contemporary world came, we're over there running to, Smith's, Albertsons, whatever. We have an organic food store, and we say, why don't you just go over to Paisha Sid's? Because he has the buffalo meat. So people who don't have the resources and they didn't plan for their children adequately, they all run to Sid's for raw honey and buffalo meat. So we call him Paisha Sid. And he's been very generous with our program by donating the buffalo meat. And now our kids, when the other camp would come, "What? Spaghetti?" But we have to say, well, this food is precious. And if these other kids come to camp and they won't eat it, it's a waste. And we also have a traditional baking day. So they learn how to make the bread. They learn how to make our cookies as well as our pies. And so when I was a little girl at Grandma's, as soon as your head was above the table, then you could start to learn to do these things. And many of the adults said, "We never let our kids do this." But man, especially the boys, got really good at making their cookies. So it's like going to your favorite auntie, in my case, my grandma's house, and you knew when you got there, she was happy to see you. She'd give you a hug. She'd tell you to come in, and depending on the timing, she'd sit you down to eat. And then, of course, there were plenty of chores to do for her. But we never worried about that, because being at Grandma's was the best place in the whole wide world. And my grandfather, like I said, is a father. My uncles grew a lot of traditional foods. And continuing to carry the traditional of Pueblo farmings is very important. Many young kids, when you ask them where does milk come from or what's potato chips made out of, they don't know. They just know it comes from a grocery store. So as the plants begin to mature and they begin to bear fruit, they're just totally thrilled. And then as the beans get longer, the pumpkins get bigger, or the corn, they watch that whole process. And we continue to talk about the importance of learning to farm and learning to pick all the wild greens. Taos is still a major hunting, gathering community. And when I was little, you would see the ladies going out in the morning, and as they came back, they had huge bundles on their back. So when we go out to gather our greens with the kids, they come back with a bundle about this big in their arms. And we first teach them how to eat that plain. And then later on we say, well, this is how you can do it too. Add some onions or some bacon. Because all of the traditional food that we gather, we're saving for the families that are going in. And part of our community service among our kids from our traditional garden is to make, now I just realized it was 32 degrees at home today. And probably go home and tomorrow go up to the garden and they'll probably all be shot. But we'll gather what we can. We collect our seeds because those are all heritage seeds from within our communities. And then the kids harvest and we see what we have. And then we make bundles. And they go with one of their metus and they take these bundles to the families that are currently in our Kiva rituals, and for those that are going in like this winter. And it's our way of showing the kids that it does take a community to support these young boys that are going in, and even the young girls if they're placed in a traditional setting, or the young girls who are teenagers and will be sitting as part of their initiation. All that Indian food has to be provided. We'll go out and pick tea, huge bundles of tea. We teach the kids how to wrap them and use a long piece of tea to tie them together and hang them. They were shown this year how to dice their squash and make them into rings, and then hang them on a piece of string in the trees. Like I say, we have freezers now, so we'll blanch and dissect and, well, not dissect, but, dice, and make huge bags of that and freeze them. So now when our fall session comes, which will be next month, due to financial resources, but we were told, got a phone call about 3 weeks ago from a man in New York who has pledged $100,000 to our art center. So we're going to do our little limited fall program, and we'll do it until the weather gets worse. It could already be worse now. And then we'll move down to the art center, and everyone will be part of the fall program. They'll be making gifts for our elders. We hold a Taos Pueblo Senior Citizen Appreciation Luncheon, and it's all traditional foods that we prepare, my staff and I, and we go to the senior center, and they have this wonderful meal, and we're always thanked by our elders. They say, you're the only ones that think about us at Christmas time. And we bring our kids who have learned songs in Tiwa, and they sing those songs for the elders. And over the course, like from now through the whatever date we set, we ask not only our community, but the greater Taos area to participate in what we call a shoebox Christmas. And you get a shoebox and you fill it up with things that elders could use. Pencils, pens, little notebooks, cough drops, Kleenex boxes, paper towels, and some people even come with blankets or clothing. This past year, we got a donation from a group called Heart Dwellers, who gave us $400, which enabled us to buy 50 fleece blankets. So we rolled the blankets up and we put them in the bag. Paisasids gave us 50 bags of his grocery bags. And so we put the blanket in the bottom, and then we filled the rest with whatever was coming through. And we also cater to those people who are diabetic, making sure their bags have appropriate candies and stuff for them, even the cough drops. And then we start telling them to come up and get their bags. And they go back and sit, and the expression on their faces is just amazing. And then they got to the bottom of the bag, and they pulled out their blankets, and so many compliments, because we're supposed to respect our elders. And as children, if an elder asks you for a glass of water, you get it, you hand it, but you're supposed to stand right here with your arms folded and wait for them to finish their water, and they give you the cup and you take it away. So in Heritage, we instill respect. When I was little, if you met an elder walking, you knew that you were supposed to acknowledge him. Ka, da. When we started Heritage, an elderly woman came and told me, for years, kids would just pass her by and not acknowledge her. So I told my kids, when you do that, one, it's a sign of disrespect, and two, you're saying, I didn't see you. You don't exist. So now, after 11 years, I still hear elders saying, yeah, this little boy passed me, and he said, da. And what does that take to say that? Not even a few seconds. But it meant the world to this man, and it meant the world to this lady. And so now many elders are coming. I have an elder teacher who comes in. Her name is Sarah Aspenland, and she teaches about nutrition. And she had this old board, food pyramid, that she made, and on one side of the pyramid are all our traditional foods, and then of course on this side is all supermarket stuff. And that's why there is such a high incidence of diabetes. White flour, sugar, and all the cereals that you see that already have processed stuff in them. And now many villages are working to go back to the use of traditional foods, and some people have really, really good results. Blood pressure's down, their cholesterol's down, but where is our Indian supermarket?
Thank you, Marie.
We don't have one.
Thank
Thank
you,
you very
Marie.
much.